Hi there, and welcome to Ian's Engage channel. I'm Ian. In previous videos I've shown how I've fitted DCC decoders to Graham Farish, Dapple and Revolution Trains locos. In this video I've got a new manufacturer to try, and will be showing how I fitted a decoder to a Sonic Models Large Prairie. Being the newest loco in my fleet, and my first from Sonic Models, it will be interesting to see if any advances have been made in making decoder fitting easier, especially for fat-fingered modelers like myself. First though, after running in, I put the class 5101 through its paces on DC. The loco features a small coreless motor that powers the centre wheels, although all wheels feature pickups. The loco was exceptionally quiet and ran along the test track really smoothly at a variety of speeds. I've usually found that Engage locos running on DC suffered from poor slow speed performance, but in the case of the Large Prairie it was absolutely superb. Running at slow speeds was a revelation to me, as I'd not seen this sort of DC performance in any of my models. Reversing the direction of travel, the loco performed just as well. There was none of the jerkiness I usually witnessed when a DC-powered loco was crawling. Based on previous experiences with my other models, I couldn't wait to see how the already excellent performance could be improved once I DCC fitted the model. To fit the decoder, we obviously first needed to get into the loco by removing the body shell. Reading the instructions didn't really help a lot, as although they were written in English, they were also in complete gibberish. Having remembered that Jonathan at Endor had DCC fitted his Large Prairie, I went and checked out his video, which I've linked in the description below. I'm glad that I did, as it turned out that the boiler support rods referenced in the instructions were a completely different part of the loco to where I thought they were. The first step was to remove the rear wheels, which simply pulled out of the NEM-like pocket. Once the rear wheels were out of the way, there was access to a small screw that holds the body shell to the chassis. The screw seemed quite reluctant to come out initially, and had me wondering whether it was captive to the chassis. However, I eventually employed a pair of tweezers to pull it away. It would have been perfect at this point if the body shell could be removed, but alas, it couldn't. First, the boiler support rods needed to be detached from the boiler. These are incredibly thin and delicate parts that are fixed to the chassis and locate into holes on the side of the boiler. I used a toothpick to lever the first one out from the side of the boiler without issue. Once the rod was disconnected from the boiler, it could be pivoted in the chassis and swung away to the side. I was very pleased at how easy this had been, but removing the second rod I ran into problems. I'd only just got the toothpick behind the rod when it pinged out of place, detaching from both the boiler and the chassis. So this was yet another loco where I'd managed to break a detail part during DCC fitting. After a large sigh, I pressed on. Once the boiler support rods had been removed from the boiler, the whole body shell could be easily lifted away from the chassis, which was perfect. With the body shell removed, the decoder blanking plate could be accessed in the cab area. The loco requires a 6-pin decoder that has its pins rotated by 90 degrees in order to fit inside the loco's cab. I'm not really a fan of having decoders in cabs, but at least by having the decoder pins at right angles to the PCB, it makes it less visually intrusive. I went for the recommended decoder made by Bachmann. However, the Bachmann decoder doesn't support Railcom, which I prefer to have on my decoders. I think I'll eventually be upgrading to an equivalent Trainer-matic decoder, which does support Railcom, but that will be close to the time I need it for train automation tasks. Fitting the decoder begins with removing the decoder blanking plate. This just requires some gentle wiggling and pulling to remove it from the decoder socket. Once the blanking plate has been removed, we can see the decoder socket. Although there are no obvious alignment markings on either the decoder socket or the decoder will only fit into the socket one way around. I found it quite difficult to get the pins to line up with their holes, as it was quite a tight fit, and because of this, it was fairly difficult to see what you were doing. I finally got the decoder in place on the second attempt, but I wasn't particularly happy with the fit, as it seemed to be at an angle to the socket. I figured it was being obstructed by the wiring on the PCB, so I ended up removing the decoder and easing the wires away from the socket using my rubber nose tweezers. I then fitted the decoder for a third time. Once fitted, I was much happier, as it sat a lot more flush to its socket. The blanking plate was stored away with a collection of other blanking plates. Then it was time to test the decoder. Before the decoder could be tested, I first needed to refit the rear wheels. These were simply pushed back into position and clicked into place. The chassis was then taken to the train room for the test. Once on track, it was time to give the loco some power, which I was always nervous about after a decoder installation. I needn't have worried though, as the loco worked very nicely. I performed a couple of back and forth operations at various speeds. Then a circuit of the test track before heading back to the workbench to refit the body shell. Refitting the body shell started off by removing the rear wheels again. The body was then fitted over the chassis, making sure that the remaining boiler support rod was angled towards the outside of the chassis, where it was out of danger of also being snapped off. Next, the small screw was refitted to the back of the chassis to secure it to the body shell. The rear wheels were then re-engaged, or at least they were when I turned them the right way up. Next came the difficult part, replacing the boiler support rods. It was almost impossible to see where the holes were on the boiler, so eventually, as well as the overhead ring light I used for filming, and the light from my magnifying headset, I also needed to use extra lighting to be able to see them. I managed to get the working boiler support rod into its hole quite quickly, so that was very pleasing. However, getting the broken rod into position was a test in patience. Just picking up the part was difficult in itself, and getting it into the hole in the boiler seemed to take forever.
I don't think so. No, it's never, ever, 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 ever gonna happen. I don't think so. No. Maybe someday you'll have it your way. Maybe someday it'll all work out. Until then, nope, definitely nope, probably never, ever, 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 ever gonna happen. Oh no.
Finally, after many attempts, the rod went into the hole and I breathed a huge sigh of relief. The next step was to secure the opposite end of the rod to the chassis, which I did using a drop or two of PVA glue. I wasn't completely sure whether I'd positioned it in the right place, but it would have to do, as it was no more than a fraction of a millimetre out of position at most. Back at the test track, I changed the decoder address using my NCE power cab. Unlike Jonathan, I successfully achieved this by programming on the main, so the chip definitely supports this feature. It was then time to see how well the fully assembled loco ran on DCC, and very smoothly was the answer. The loco had run excellently on DC and continued to exhibit excellent running traits on DCC. Well, that's about it for this update. It turns out that while the decoder fitting process went relatively well, it certainly hadn't been made any easier in this new model. Having to detach the tiny fragile boiler support rods before being able to remove the body shell was absolutely crazy. Then, having broken off one of them during the removal process, all manner of patience was required to be able to mend it. I class this as a special form of torture reserved for N-gauge modelers. However, the sense of satisfaction having completed the job was immense. The loco ran fantastic on DC and runs just as well, if not a little bit smoother, on DCC. Overall, I think the mechanism in the model is superb and think it's one of the best I've encountered in any of my locos. Let me know what you think. Have you fitted a decoder to this model? Did you experience similar issues to myself, or was it all plain sailing for you? Alternatively, if you've got any hints, tips, useful tools or techniques to pass on to a beginner in N-gauge modelling, or if you simply want to say hello, then please do so in the comment section. Anything and everything you've got to say will be greatly appreciated. In the meantime, thanks ever so much for watching. Hopefully I'll have another update soon. Bye.